All right, Nancy, 5 seconds.
Welcome to Chapter Connect. We're so pleased to have everybody here tonight and looking forward to another Chapter Connect where we're learning about some amazing things happening, this time with the Rocky Mountain chapter. Jeff Blumenfeld, you have been the leader of the Rocky Mountain chapter for quite some time, and I know you've been a great mentor to me when I took over as chapter chair in Texas. But not only have you been chapter chair and also being a prolific writer, you have done an awful lot at the headquarters level for leadership of the Explorers Club. So we have a great deal of wisdom to glean from you tonight. And I know you've got a lineup of some pretty remarkable people. So I'm going to turn this over to you because everybody here is not listening to me. They didn't tune in for me. They turned in for you and Rocky Mountain chapter. So Jeff, please take it away.
Nancy, thanks so much for that introduction. I've been in the club for 30 years and I couldn't imagine my life having not been in the Explorers Club. It's just been great. Let me change this view on here. Just a minute. Screen share. Right here. Hold it. And you see the view, right? You all see that?
Yeah, we see presenter view, Jeff.
You see presenter view. Okay. I got to change this to. All right. Anyway, we'll just move on. So the Explorers Club, Rocky Mountain chapter. We're actually quite large geographically. We have 170 members, and we're in 6 states so far. And you can get an idea from this Google map that we did. Most of us are concentrated here in the Denver or Boulder area. As you can see there, we did a short study of that. So the part of the success of the organization is that when we set schedules for our meetings, and we try to do one every month, we try to give our members at least 60 to 90 days in advance. That's been a key to the success of participation among our 170 members. With the help of Jeff Donenfeld and Juliana Horidisk, we have been working quite actively in social media. We have a website, explorers-rm.org, and we're expanding our presence on Facebook as well. And we also developed our own logo, and we have these stickers that we sell to folks. And once we all start traveling and flying again, if you ever notice that everybody's Macintosh laptop looks alike, that's why putting a sticker on the outside of your laptop makes sense. So these are really our laptop and cell phone stickers. And it shows the maroon bells outside of Aspen, one of the most recognizable landmarks here in Colorado. Very proud that, we had one in-person dinner in 2020, and that was about it until things got shut down. But we did 11 Zoom events. I'll walk you through a few of those that we did. We managed to squeeze out last fall one live event when we did an interpretive walk through a field of prairie dogs. For this chapter, our sole source of revenue are guest fees, in addition to which the Explorers Club has a rebate program based on the amount of members that we recommend, new members that we've recommended. So that's another source of revenue for us. So the bottom line, quite proud of this. During the 2021 fiscal year, we had 11 Zoom events and one live event, the Prairie Dog Walk, at a net cost to the chapter of $181. So we were able to effectively stay in the game without spending too much money. So some of our speakers, Paul Dye, member of the club, who worked on the shuttle. He was mission command for the shuttle program. Dave Johnson, zookeeper at the Denver Zoo. Mark Armstrong talked about the legacy of his father, Neil. John Houston, polar explorer, talked. We had a presentation by Michael Gusev on the Dry Valleys of Antarctica. Fascinating. one of the more humorous presentations. I don't know why, but this is the world's greatest collector of coprolites, otherwise known as dinosaur feces. I like to call them number one in the number two business. And it was a great presentation by George Fransden from one of our chapters in Florida. Karen Barton spoke about the Jula tragedy. This was Africa's Titanic. It was a tragedy in 2002. 1,863 people died on this very little known ferry disaster in Africa, in Senegal. Tez Steinberg, a distance rower, talked about how he conducted science while he was out in the middle of nowhere, out in the sea. And we had a presentation by Buddy Levy about his book on the Adolph Greely expedition. Jim Pisarowicz, he spoke about caving in Yellowstone, and the aforementioned prairie dog walk. You know, it's a good thing these animals are so cute. Otherwise, they'd be called prairie rats. And it seems like everything eats prairie dogs. So they're a keystone species here in the West. Coming up, we and any member is able to zoom in and participate in these. And hopefully someday we'll get back to in person. Jim Davidson's going to talk about his new book, The Next Everest, and Jeff Sechel is going to talk about a book on John Glenn and the this Cold War space race. I hope you'll all think about joining us. We can make the link available to you to all of you. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first group of speakers. We have 7 speakers tonight. They've all been encouraged to speak briefly, and then we'll have a Q&A session after that. So let me stop share. And our next speaker is Robert Mack West. And Mack, if you'll cue up your slides while I'm doing your introduction. And there's Mack. Since 1992, Mack has owned and operated a consulting firm called Informal Learning Experiences in Denver. It serves clients including museums and zoos and professional associations and government agencies and community-based organizations and others. He's had over 100 consulting assignments with informal education institutions across the US. Informal Learning Experiences also publishes an independent journal, the Informal Learning Review, and maintains the largest searchable database of traveling exhibitions about largely science, natural history, technology, and other topics. In 1983 to 87, he was director of the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh, and he's a graduate of Lawrence College and the University of Chicago. Mack, take it away.
Okay, well, if we could go to my title slide. I want to talk about an interesting experience I had over the course of many years with the country of Pakistan. I started out life as a paleontologist, evolutionary biologist. In the late 70s, early 80s, I was curator of geology at the Milwaukee Public Museum, and therefore had the opportunity to, next slide please, to spend winters in the foothills of the Himalayas, including, as you can see, the northern part of Pakistan on this map. And what I was able to do at that time is what we're going to talk about for a few minutes, and then we'll see how this has evolved, if you will, into a new approach to science in the country of Pakistan. So we have the Himalayan foothills in the north, and then if you look down on the bottom on the Arabian Sea, you'll see Karachi. And we're going to start in the foothills and we're going to move to Karachi. So if we could go to the next one, please. There is Mack West and his Indiana Jones apparel. And this is what the northern part of Pakistan looks like when you get a little bit away from the mountains. And what this is all about is the fact that the Indian subcontinent moved north, hit Asia, the Himalayas resulted, and these massive sedimentary units were deposited along the southern foothill of the Himalayas. Next slide, please. And we would spend several months every winter in Nepal and Pakistan looking and, as I say, eventually finding fossils in those rocks. So on the left here we are looking at the rock. On the right, you can see a upper jaw of an artiodactyl. This is an animal that was about between 30 and 40 million years old. But what we were doing really was opening up the Pakistani paleontology. And it went in some very, very interesting ways. Next slide, please. The most interesting was the discovery of this animal called Pakicetus attaki, a primitive ancestral whale. And it doesn't look much like a whale, but over the course of the last couple of decades, there have been some really, really magnificent discoveries of the animals that showed the movement from land to water. And this particular specimen was one of the leads, and it is, I've found it in museums literally around the world, that there are models of it, that people are so pleased to see how whales came. And we now know that their closest living relatives are hippopotamuses, which is kind of interesting. But that was really the highlight of my work on the Badlands of northern Pakistan in the Oligocene rocks right there. Then, next please. One of the aspects of that kind of a field work, which many, we jumped ahead there. When we got it, there we are. One of the aspects that so many of us have is that when we're in the field, I call it living locally. And we got to meet some really, really wonderful people in northern Pakistan. And you see on the right, people working in their farmyard, and on the left, kids who are sitting on the steps of one of the buildings that we were able to live in for part of the time. The important thing about this is 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. And as we all know, for the last couple of decades, Pakistan has had this problem with the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda and the issues of treating females appropriately. And I keep looking at this picture with my heart. But let's go on to the next one, please. If we go on to the south, we're in a different world. There's Karachi, the 12th largest urban area in the world. And I was invited in 2016 by the Dawood Foundation, the private sector of one of the largest corporations in the country of Pakistan, who had been running what they call the Magnificence exhibitions. And these were weekend operations that attracted tens of thousands of people for interactive science. Next, please. And here are some of the things that were part of the Magnificence exhibitions, where we see these demonstrations, we see auditorium work, and then there also were lots of hands-on laboratory activities. But what you're also seeing is that there are lots and lots of women and girls who are part of all of this. And that's a big part of what the Dawood Foundation is really, really promoting, is equal access to science for all people in Pakistan. Next, please. And what they are doing now is they're in the process of building the Magnificence Center, the first science center in the country of Pakistan. And here we see on the right, the installation of an exhibit on human biology, and on the left, an interactive program for youngsters where they're looking at balloons and moving air. Next, please. And this is, this is the building that is now constructed, and they're looking for a mid-August opening of the lower 2 floors of this building. Of course, that is now all up in the air because of the pandemic and travel issues and whatnot. But it's in my contract that I will be there for the opening of the Magnificence Center. And next slide, please. And this is something that I look at with great pleasure, that my work trying to find fossils in the northern part of the country is resulting in a fantastic science experience for the citizens of Pakistan. Okay, Jeff, all yours.
Well, thanks very much, Markus. Next up, I'm sorry, thanks very much, Mack. Next up is Markus Rashke. Markus is professor of physics and chemistry at the University of Colorado. His research is on laser science, developing new optical microscopy techniques, oh, geez, to resolve the quantum nature of materials at the scales of its atomic constituents. In parallel, he pursues a scientific interest in earth sciences and mineralogy, with research in the Colorado Front Range, the North Cascades of the Pacific Northwest, and the eastern margin of the Tibetan Plateau. He graduated from Rutgers with an MS in physics and from, here we go, Technische Universität Munich with a PhD in physics. And I need a PhD to read his description. Markus, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, it's a great pleasure. Are you seeing the full screen mode? Just a reality check here, what you're looking at.
We see it.
Very good, thank you. So yeah, I'll give a brief summary actually of what we were doing this year, and actually in a very coincidental COVID context actually. This is from a trip to China in this year. I just came back. It was from January to March, and I magically tunneled in, continuing a project we have been doing for several years now, and this is on is a focus on the mineralogy of actually a world famous also for mineral collector specimen locality, which produces beryl and scheelite. And all the details would be a talk in itself. I just want to give you sort of a little bit the facet of what we were looking for before and what we were doing now. So as Jeff mentioned, I'm actually a laser science spectroscopist doing a lot of lab work and occasionally need some fresh air. So on weekends, I play geology professor incognito. And so what we're working on is at the eastern margin of the Tibetan Plateau. What you see there is Chengdu, a major city you're probably familiar with in the Sichuan Basin. And the area is characterized by this enormous vertical topographic relief where you have from the Sichuan Basin at 500 meters, almost 7 kilometers vertical rise over a horizontal distance of only 20 kilometers. So this area is fascinating for its natural beauty with glaciated mountains. This is Minyakonga, the tallest, third tallest peak outside the Himalayas worldwide. And our research area is in this area to the north and at also significant elevation. And the area has its challenges. It's access to a culturally sensitive area. This extreme topographic relief and the seismic activity, which some of you have witnessed or heard of these earthquakes. Most recently, one which just broke a few days actually after our last trip. And so in the past, we were always going up. And so we were going up over from the deep valley floors. This is a deeply cut canyon area. And then me and graduate students are sampling. And then we'll take this mountain under a microscope to give you this in a nutshell to find out what's in it. And this is where we go really from the kilometer and meter scale to samples under the microscope into the millimeter scale, studying really mineral composition, chemical structure, atomic substitution, going to submillimeter, micron down to atomic scale, trying to understand the composition and structure and properties of understanding this complex mineralization in this very remote area, which has previously not been actually researched. So the interest on this trip was then that we want to go the other way. We want to go at the very bottom of these valleys to see where actually the mineralizing fluids are coming from. And just as hard as it is to get actually to these summits, it is actually equally hard to get into these deep canyons to where actually granite is exposed, which provided the fluids, as we believe. And this is something best done actually in the winter months. I will tell you in a moment why. And so I was on a trip this year and magically made it through the behind the Iron Curtain. As you may know, China is largely COVID-free as a result of extreme measures, including quarantine on travel. And so I was doing different research visits at different places, working with students and postdocs. And coincidentally, I was actually trailing the World Health Organization's mission. That was days after they were in Wuhan. This is actually a picture of the famous market where increasing evidence is that COVID may not have emerged. I was in Kunming, that's actually in Yunnan province, where in fact the coronavirus population abounds, and a lot of the bat population, you may know that in this Southeast Asian area, it was Laos, Vietnam, where these viruses occur. And then our mountain, that's Xubaoding of interest. So this is how this looked in practice. If you wonder how travel to China was possible, or it was possible through a special visa. And then you go 2 weeks in quarantine, which is almost like a prison experience. And then 5 PCR tests later, you are actually in the day-to-day life on the market and playing mahjong. But then we got in the mountains. And so this is how it looks in the winter. It's actually comparably dry. This is one reason why we went there. And we wanted to pick the right time that we can actually travel up a river valley in the absence of these summer monsoons where they are wall to wall filled with water, but just right at time of the year where we can go to elevations where we're not deep snow covered. What you do experience, and this is something we will all experience in the few hundred years in the future, there will be a COVID Anthropocene from masks and needles and PCR tests and other molecular traces we will probably find from this year. And so starting at the valley bottom, this is normally in the summer filled and inaccessible. So the water level is just low enough. You're starting at tropical elevation. And fighting through ticks and leeches and passing up. And as you get higher in elevation, of course, it gets colder. So we'll get to first ice formations, and then it's actually drier up higher. There's no water in the river anymore, but there's still snow cover. So just below. And the goal is, or before we were up in the clouds at the actual locality sampling the minerals, and now we want to get at the bottom to sample the granite. So it's a long trip. This is what we're tracing, what we're chasing. It seems crazy for someone not at all interested in geology or anything. You're collecting rocks, okay? And the topographic relief, you get a flavor for. We were starting out initially at about 1,000 meter elevation, going to 3,500. The locality would be at 5,000. And we get to the granite, and all what we're looking for is a handful of granite. So all this is about is a handful of granite, and that's the key to the origin of the mineralized fluid. So that's what in a nutshell. And thanks for your attention. There were a lot of people I need to acknowledge. Some are by name. Many others, as you can imagine, with travel in China into these sensitive areas, do prefer not to be mentioned. So thank you.
Markus, thanks so much. I'm going to have to ask you what it was like to be in lockdown for 2 weeks. We'll have to do that. We'll have to do that later. Our next speaker is Juliana Horidisk. I'm pleased, thrilled actually. She was giving a book talk, and Ulyana introduced herself here in Boulder, and we've been friends ever since. She's a scientist. She's a mountaineer. She's an educator. She's based near Denver. She received her PhD in geological sciences from the University of Colorado Boulder, and in 2016 started Science in the Wild, which is a citizen science company focused on creating immersive and educational science adventure expeditions for the lay public. She's a local guide at Fjallraven's Denver flagship store, and we all love Fjallraven for being a sponsor of the club. She's a certified, we're not done yet, she's a certified polar guide. She's a polar guide with PTGA, she's a visiting assistant professor at Colorado College in the environmental program, and she's a remote research associate with the Alaska Climate Research Center at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. And there's more. She and her husband are climbing the 7 summits in the 50 US state high points in Colorado's 100 highest peaks, as part of their Summit Songs and Science project focused on fitness, music, and science education. She recently became a National Geographic certified educator, but what I'm most impressed about is the fact that she took a ride on the Vomit Comet. Ulyana, take it away.
Thanks so much. So let me try to share the screen here.
The Vomit Comet.
Yeah, that is a story for another day. But let's see here. Hopefully y'all can see my screen here. So thanks very much. It's an honor to be a part of this. I've been a member of the Explorers Club for a while now, almost coming on 10 years. And I started off as a student member when I was nominated for work I was doing in the Himalaya of Nepal. And since then have become a national fellow. So what I wanted to chat about during this chapter Connect is some programs that I've been a part of. So this is kind of correlated there, Jeff, with the Vomit Comet. So NASA has something called the Harrell project. That's the Human Exploration Research Analog. So it puts together strangers in a capsule for varying amounts of time. This is varied from about 2 weeks to up to 45 days now. And this is actually part of an Explorers Club flag report. So I put the link down here if you wanted to read in depth about what that kind of experience was like. But basically, this is at NASA Johnson Space Center. And what they're doing is they're simulating a deep space mission. They like to say, while Mars attracts our attention, asteroids demand it, right? If we have an asteroid coming our way, we're going to want to know about it, do something about it, but also from the purposes of mining resources from these things. So NASA really wants to know more about how do we get to these places, and they're going to be long duration. So how do groups of people interact? How do you respond to stress and confinement? Things like that, and isolation. And I think we can all identify with this this year going through this pandemic. So I kind of got a head start on it in 2016. And when in September and October, for about 7 weeks total, I took part in this project. 30 days are actually in the capsule. And then there's a quarantine period, actually of 2 weeks in the beginning, as well as training. And then there's a debrief of a week. And this is what home looked like for that month. So this is a habitat that got brought from the desert into this warehouse on the Johnson Space Center campus in Houston. It's been repurposed for the Harrell project. So it's 2 levels, and then this kind of excess space on top here is where you have a crawl space really to sleep up there. You have a hygiene module attached here, and then you have an airlock. And in the airlock is where researchers would come and go to actually take blood samples because they're looking for these biomarkers for stress. But they don't want to break simulation. They don't want people coming and going. So what you had to do was put your arm through a curtain. So like, I don't like needles to begin with. So then imagine you're putting your arm through and someone's taking a blood sample. But it was just actually a really interesting experience being confined to a place where you cannot leave, at least with the pandemic. After a certain amount of time, we could go outdoors. So this is a totally different experience for me. And I just wanted to give you a quick tour of what that looked like. So this is the first floor. We have a little laboratory space. Since we're simulating, we're doing everything in virtual reality. But when we had our rendezvous with the asteroid, magically some samples appeared in our lab that we could use this glove box to actually study and do some of the basic geology there. So I was not only the mission commander, I was also the geologist and the scientist that could help guide my team on those types of analyses. And then on the second floor, this is where we'd have our space to watch movies, to make food. So this is food that was repurposed from the International Space Station. And then the ladder leading up here to the sleeping space. So I actually had a chance to present on Harrell at the ECAD in 2017 on cold places. And since then, there have been some initial results that have come out. So I wanted to take the opportunity to share some of those. This study just came out in 2020. I put the full title here if you wanted to look it up: Cognitive Performance During Confinement and Sleep Restriction. And so basically what they're finding out is it's not necessarily the confinement. Like after 2 weeks of confinement, people aren't really having that much of a negative effect on their cognitive abilities, but rather when they put us through sleep deprivation circumstances, that's what really caused those psychomotor skills to go down, as well as cognitive abilities, which should come as no surprise, but it was really interesting as the guinea pig in this experiment, what that felt like to be up for almost 40 hours straight and still trying to function and still trying to get along with people. Is that realistic in a real life situation on the way to Mars or back? Possibly, if you're facing an emergency, right? If you have a puncture or if there's a fire breaking out, everyone might have to be up at the same time. So they're finding out that better ways really to deal with these kinds of problems. As well as they found out that the team is often most vulnerable during the third quarter of a mission. And it doesn't matter how long that mission lasts, whether it's 2 weeks, a month, 6 months. So putting that into the context of Mars, that would encompass the return journey. So you can imagine team dynamics devolving, and how do you actually deal with that? What are those, what are the symptoms? What are the markers for it? That's what they're studying. And then they have had mixed crews. We were a mixed crew, 2 women, 2 men. They had all women and all men teams as well. And they basically found that the ability of crew members to combine their expertise and work together definitely declined, and it was largely independent of gender. Both the best performing and worst performing teams were mixed gender. So those are some of the initial things coming out. There's still publications coming because the last campaigns just happened about a year ago. So there's a lot of data that they're going through. We often hear the term the right stuff, right, to go to the moon. They were fighter pilots. They were pretty stoic. They were very focused on the mission. And so one of the researchers from Northwestern University has found that we're pretty confident that the right stuff for the team that go to Mars, it's going to be different from what was the right stuff for those initial moon missions, because people have to get along. And I think, again, going through this pandemic, when we're in close quarters with people we love, it can be extremely challenging. And so we really need to figure out those personable skills. It comes down to people who can really deal with stressful situations with a good sense of humor. And then just to pivot a bit, Jeff mentioned science in the wild. Because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to go out into the field, but I got contacted by a climber who went in December of 2020. His name is Aaron Isaacson, and he took this picture of our patch up there on the summit of Kilimanjaro. He wanted to get some data when he was climbing to give purpose to his expedition. So going beyond just climbing, what could he do to contribute to science? And I told him we'd been sampling for a couple of years to understand how those glaciers are changing on one of the 7 summits. So in a nutshell here, dark particles that fall on snow and ice really absorb more of the sunlight. Like I'm wearing this dark fleece, I'm going to feel warmer out in the sunlight. I'll absorb more heat. Particles on the snow will do the same thing. They're going to heat up that snow and ice faster and cause it to melt faster. So when we're talking about climate change in some of these places, the glaciated peaks of the world, yes, there's the impacts from increasing levels of carbon dioxide and increasing temperatures, but there's also a whole nother story with these particulates that are falling on the snow and ice. And that's what we've been looking at. And so in 2017 and 19 expeditions, we went to this glacier just off the summit. You can see part of the trail here. Just off the summit of Kilimanjaro. And then Aaron was able to get here. They had a pretty heavy snowfall when he was there. So he was able to get 2020 measurements from here. This is what one of those samples looks like. You collect a bunch of snow and ice, you melt it down, and then it filters down to just a quarter-size sample. And you can see how much dust and black particulates are present. We run that through this home-built light absorption heating method to try to figure out how much what's called effective black carbon is in that sample, and then try to model how much it'll melt. And so these are, just wanting my last slide here, sharing some of those results. They're color-coded to the years of the expeditions. So to explain this a bit, we call it effective black carbon because when black carbon comes from wildfires, it comes from fossil fuels, emissions, but can also come from natural things like land use changes. So we don't want to say that everything is due to humans. So there's still this parsing out of the data that has to happen. It's just extremely expensive to run those samples. But this is a way people can at least get an initial look at how dirty the snow and ice is and what impacts they may be having on melting. And then this line going across here, this dashed line, is a typical North American value of black carbon in the atmosphere. So we can see basically really high values in Kilimanjaro. That could be a whole mixture of things. Again, there's volcanic ash, there's dust. But recently, Kilimanjaro has been experiencing more wildfires. So perhaps we're capturing some of this activity, sticking itself to that ice and causing it to melt more rapidly. So if you're interested in learning more, you can visit the webpage, and happy once we get to go on expedition again and continue our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulyana. So this is just a snapshot of some of our members in the chapter. And if you need more information on any of that, I suggest you just go online and look them up, contact them personally if it interests you. Every one of our presenters today could fill a room and speak for an hour and a half easily on their work. My friend George Basch. George and I go back at least 10 years, and he really is making a difference in this world. He served on various boards, you name it, schools, hospitals, drug and alcohol rehabilitation centers, and he's quite active in Rotary. And of course, the motto of Rotary is service above self. I met him through the Himalayan Stove Project, which he founded in 2010. The project provided clean burning, fuel efficient cook stoves as replacements to traditional stoves or open fire pits. If any of you have been to Nepal or really any underprivileged country, a third world country, you'll see that the conditions that some of these homes, some of these people are living in is just horrifying with open fires in their home. It's like they're living back in the Stone Age. Well, George saw that, and in the ensuing 10 years, he's transformed the lives of over 50,000 people in Nepal and made a measurable improvement in the country's air quality. And the project won him a Citation of Merit from the Explorers Club. Recently, he formed Champions of the Planet to educate individuals and families of what they can do to help alleviate the climate crisis. George grew up in Chicago and graduated from MIT with a Bachelor's of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering, and he earned an MBA from Northwestern University. And I've seen him operate. When he's looking for sponsorship money, nobody works a trade show like George Basch. He even wears a chef's hat, and he's earned the nickname as the chief cook of the Himalayan Stove Project. George, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. You just gave my entire presentation. I'm going to tell you about the Himalayan Stove Project and its origin, and then a little bit about Champions of the Planet. To do that, I have to go back 20 years. 20 years ago yesterday, I arrived at Everest Base Camp as part of the support team for blind mountaineer Eric Weinmeier's successful summit bid. Next slide, please, Jeffrey. I don't have a PhD, so somebody else has got to run the slides. This is the Lukla airstrip. And interestingly enough, it was being paved, literally being paved the day that I arrived there in 2010, 2001, 2002. We arrived at Lukla and then trekked in to base camp. The climbing team was already at base camp. And if we look at the next slide, we can see the ladders that they were trying to get blind boy Eric to navigate across. Eric told me later he was really glad that he couldn't see because it was too damn scary. Next slide, please. One of our guides, as we were trekking in, told me that as a child, before going to school, he spent hours every morning gathering firewood. That made an impression on me. I didn't do anything about it, but it was a data point. Next slide, please. The noxious smoke-filled rooms in homes and tea houses along the trek, caused in the worst cases by yak dung being used as fuel, also made an impression. Next slide, please. We trekked slowly going up to Everest Base Camp because one member of our group was Adam Scaturo, the quadriplegic son of Pasquale Scaturo, our team leader. The porters carried him up in one of those triangular baskets that you see in the Himalayan pictures. And in 10-minute sessions, the kid weighed 160 pounds, and it's about 50 miles from Lukla to base camp. So that was a really remarkable accomplishment. But PD wanted Adam to experience base camp, even though they weren't able to climb. And if you see the next picture, we can see Mount Everest or base camp, excuse me, and then Mount Everest, the next shot. And here is that's me. Everest is the one poking up way in the back. And on the next shot, this is my favorite one from the whole trip. This is the blind guy pushing the gimp in a wheelchair at Everest Base Camp. Next, let's leave that one up for a minute. That's fine. Oh, you can go back there. It's okay, Jeffrey. 9 years later, I was again trekking in Nepal and encountered similar unhealthy conditions created by inefficient cooking. A few months later in Bhutan, a trekker casually mentioned an efficient, low polluting stove. And that's the one that he mentioned. That's a picture of our stove up in Upper Musqueam a couple of years later. And it was a light bulb moment. I'd observed this problem in the 2 trips to Nepal, but hadn't really thought about solving it until this guy at dinner, a fellow I never met before, made this comment. It was a chance encounter that was the spark that started the Himalayan Stove Project. Next slide, please, Jeffrey. And these 2 pictures are the same room before and after, 10 minutes apart. And that's what our stove does. It cuts the indoor air pollution by 90%. It uses 75% less fuel, so children can go to school instead of collecting wood. And it cooks twice as fast. In March of 2010, so a year after that, I was inducted into the Explorers Club. The project was supported by wonderful guidance and input from numerous club members, including Jeff Blumenfeld. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff and I met my first day at the club at the board meeting and or the public members meeting, and we've been friends and collaborators ever since. Another key member in the team, I call him the godfather of the project, was my longtime friend and one of my sponsors into the club, Sir Chris Bonnington, who some of you may know or know about. Chris, with his decades of experience in Nepal, provided invaluable help in structuring our program. In the spring of 2012, we made the first delivery of 1,500 stoves. And Jeffrey, if you could quickly scroll through the next 9 slides, just to give people an idea of what we're talking about here. That's how we were working out in the field. And there's a happy couple that just got their stove. That's my friend Sarita, who's enjoying being freed. And this is Jay Rajbandari and I toasting one another with the Explorers Club Scotch for the successful delivery of stoves. In 2014, we started a 2-year flag expedition called Breathe Easy Nepal to gather field data on the effectiveness of our stoves. We were aided substantially by Explorers Club member Dr. Ken Kamler, who had done extensive medical work in Nepal. Now let's go to the chart. We measured particulate levels in the air in homes using our stoves and compared those with readings where conventional cooking was being used. The upper line that's going up to the stratosphere are the particulate levels in the conventional cooking facilities, and the lower line, which is actually decreasing, are the particulates from our stoves. And the line is going down because as the stoves warm up, they become more efficient and are better at utilizing all of the fuel. Next slide, please. In April 2015, entire villages were flattened and hundreds of thousands of Nepalese were made homeless by the devastating earthquake. Our nimble organization moved quickly. We sourced and distributed tents, tarps, and other urgently needed basic survival supplies. Next slide, please. On the next 2 slides, we sourced some community stoves out of Nepal, also made by EnviroFit, so that we were able to set up community feeding facilities. These stoves, we could run 300 people at a meal through these, preparing balbat and other local delicacies. And next slide, please. We also sourced and installed solar panels, because obviously with the devastating earthquake, everything was in the toilet. Next slide, please. As Jeff mentioned, in 2017, the Explorers Club awarded me and the project the Citation of Merit. I was honored that Dr. Kamler made the award. Next slide, please. I was touched when Dr. Kamler said, quotes, "Without disrupting their culture or lifestyle, George and his team are cleaning the air for thousands of Himalayan families, one household at a time." Next slide, please. In our 8 years of activity on the ground, we installed over 6,500 family stoves. And when we add in our earthquake relief efforts, we estimate that we've impacted the lives of over 50,000 people, which would be an overflow crowd at the Houston Astros Stadium. that is a scale of the number of people that whose lives we impacted. I'm obviously very, very proud of that. Next slide, please. The coronavirus destroyed our supply chain. So last year we had to wind down the project. We're unable to source stoves anymore. Next slide, please. David Attenborough came out with a very, very provocative film in October of last year. It's called Life on Our Planet. If you haven't seen it, please do. His dire prediction about the precarious future for the human race was shocking and reinforced my long-held concerns about the seriousness of the climate emergency. Next slide, please. This chart shows the increase in greenhouse gases since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution around 1850. I mean, it's almost a vertical curve in a century and a half. Inspired by Sir David, I started Champions of the Planet. Next slide, please. Our goal is to become a comprehensive, trustworthy resource center and a proactive force guiding individuals and families to live a more sustainable lifestyle. We aim to help people learn, to motivate them to act, and to encourage them to teach others. We're also encouraging and helping to facilitate programs in schools so that children can learn there as well. I'm passionate about this. Even though I just turned 84, I'm going to start another project and see how well we do with this one. I believe that this problem is very serious. Let's all live a more environmentally conscious life and teach and encourage others to do the same. There's an article about this in the current edition of the Explorer's Log, which is, I think, out now on the internet, but will be mailed out to all club members sometime this month. If we all do our part, small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. Our website, championsoftheplanet.org, is a valuable resource, and we will continue to add to it. I'm putting several items in the chat, or Kevin is doing that for me. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attention. And Jeff, thanks for including me in this presentation.
Thank you, George. And I would add that one of the world's highest circulation magazines did a feature story on George a few years ago. You'd be surprised to know the name of the magazine. It's a Costco magazine with upwards of 12 million circulation, and George is profiled in it. And it's a good thing he's a Costco member, otherwise they wouldn't have done the story. Brian, you are up. Brian is a disturbance ecologist, a biogeographer, and a climate change scientist that works around the world in various types of landscape change and natural disasters. He's a faculty member at the University of Colorado, Denver, and an affiliate faculty member at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. He moved to Colorado recently from Alaska, but continues to do work in the far north, as well as in Chile and Nepal and other locations around the world. He's a National Geographic explorer and has led expeditions sponsored by multiple agencies. His recent expedition to Cape Horn during this expedition, he discovered the world's southernmost tree. And that story is going to be in next month's issue of National Geographic magazine. You can also see it online currently. He enjoys speaking to public audiences about exploration and the excitement of science, and has recently started a project to map the range edges of all the species in North America. And I must say, he's got two young sons, and his older son, you just watch out. His older son, Cole, has been attending Explorers Club meetings, and I expect him to join in about, what, Brian, 5 years?
About 5, yeah. I think he qualifies in 5. Okay, well, thank you, Jeff. So yeah, I'm Brian Buma. I am also at the University of Colorado. I'm an ecologist. You know, ecology is a fascinating, a huge field, and I work in change ecology. I'm interested in how life changes and responds to the broader world and where that change is happening most rapidly. So most of my research work, my bread and butter work, is actually post-disturbance stuff, like wildfires and landslides, natural disasters. But a lot of the exploration focuses on the edges of things. So like here, so this is a picture off the southern head wall of Cape Horn, where, as Jeff said, I led a Nat Geo expedition about a year ago And we located the world's southernmost tree. Oops, my mouse is in the wrong spot. There we go. I also am interested in time. So I, in 2016, rediscovered and now caretake the longest running observational network focused on ecosystem development in the world. It's actually in the back of Glacier Bay, and it was founded in 1916. It's quite the adventure. It's one of my favorite stories to tell. We used hand-sketched maps from 1916, compasses, and all the distances were in paces. Literally, X marks the spot on some of the landmarks. And it is a fascinating thing. It was actually featured on the cover of Ecology a few years ago. And I'll actually be back there in a couple of years looking for another lost plot network. It's not quite as old, but a bit more extensive and just as lost. Other work involves edges of species elevationally. So here I have a team establishing a long-term vegetation monitoring plot on the edge of the Juneau ice field in Southeast Alaska. Other work in that part of Alaska, that's the part I used to live in, involves the range limits of climate-sensitive plants like yellow cedar, which was featured on Diversity and Distributions a few years back. That's also a fascinating story involving snow loss, but I'll leave it for later. Nepal's come up a lot. Actually, like I said, I look at the impact of natural disasters on ecosystems, but sometimes life feeds back. So this is actually a shrine placed on a mound of rubble about 100 feet high, which buried a village during the 2015 earthquake that George just talked about. People literally live and work on active slides in this part of Nepal, the Bodhikosi Valley. And I'm interested in how vegetation stabilizes hill slopes and how people can act to, or work with their agriculture to stabilize the land. But yeah, one of the more interesting current projects is Cape Horn. So the last expedition, which was published last year, documented the world's southernmost tree, which if you're interested is a Nothofagus betuloides. But we also found traces of indigenous presence, which marks the furthest out of furthest out of Africa humanity ever made it. So we're planning on going back next year, hopefully, to fully document and share that cool story. And finally, I'll wrap up with an exploration you can help out with. So there's a link in the chat. This is the Edges of All Life project. This is mapping the northernmost and southernmost extent of every species in North America, soon to expand to the world. This is the zoomed out one, but if you go to that link, you can zoom into your neighborhood. There's over 19,000 species, and it's a wonderful exploration tool. It's with National Geographic, Esri, and iNaturalist. It gets people out in the woods. It gets people out in the fields, documenting the plants, learning the plants, and pushing the record of where we know these things are, and so we can follow their migration essentially in real time as the climate moves. So again, that's in there. I don't have time to go online and show you to zoom in, but I encourage you to check it out. No matter where you live, there's a record you could set nearby, like this weekend. So that's it. Thanks. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to our group.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian, and say hello to Cole from me, who came on our dinosaur walk, which we just did last week. Lauren Harrell is a new member of the club. Lauren is a statistician and artist who's passionate about marine mammal science and conservation. She currently works at Google, where she contributes part-time in bioacoustics research to develop models that can automatically detect marine mammal vocalizations from underwater acoustic readings. She holds a PhD in biostatistics from the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health, and she's married to fellow club member Mike Siebert, and Mike himself is working on a lunar robotic arm. Lauren. And you might be on mute.
Yeah, so I'll be talking to y'all today about the bioacoustics work that we're doing at Google. So we've got a team of a lot of part-timers like myself and one full-time member with our goal of detecting animal sounds using AI to help biologists protect endangered wildlife species. So in practice, there's a variety of different methods that scientists can use to study different populations of animals across the world. And one of the most efficient ways and one of the cheapest ways is actually through acoustic recordings. So especially in bird research or in cetacean conservation, you will see hydrophones deployed or microphones deployed in different areas that are recording for a very extended period of time. But the problem is there's all of this massive amounts of data, but you have to actually be able to process it and listen to it. And this is where the Google team has come in. We have the capabilities of not only modeling the data using the same models that we use for YouTube to detect, dogs barking or cars honking for annotations, but we also have the ability to process a massive scale of data. So when Ann Allen, our collaborator through NOAA, reached out to us, she had over 15 years worth of data, of which approximately about 3 weeks had labels attached to it. And so she wanted to see if we could help her find where there might be more detections of humpback calls in this massive amount of data. On the left-hand side here, you can see a tool that we built. This actually is a tool where you can visualize over a year of one site worth of data where our model is overlaid. And so this allows researchers to zoom in and out and annotate where they think there might be something interesting happening in the audio data. And then on the right-hand side, you can kind of see the scale of the data. We have several different deployments of hydrophones from NOAA where we were looking at the data and across many, many years. And so this was a huge amount of information, but only a limited set was actually annotated with labels. So our project really started here of understanding where can we find humpbacks in this massive amount of data that's coming from very remote locations. So as an example, I can't present this without sharing calls. So what happens is we actually take the raw waveforms. So we don't actually look at the sound itself. We turn it into an image called a spectrogram. So what you can see is the darker portion of the spectrogram is where there's no acoustic signal whatsoever, and the brighter image is where there's a louder sound. And then it allows us to see features of the acoustic data that might not be able to be heard by a human being. And so the researchers often will label this data, and this is where we got our labels from, using the spectrogram and the audio in combination with one another. But we actually transform the waveforms into spectrograms to do our modeling. And so we use a convolutional neural network to detect where there might be additional parts of the data that have whales present. And so this is where we can find, oh, that's actually a whale singing. So we recently actually open sourced our humpback whale detector. So our teammate Matt Harvey published this on the TF Hub that you can find for TensorFlow. But our paper was just published a couple of months ago in partnership with the folks at NOAA, where we showed what we can find just looking at the annotations provided by this model. We found that there were humpbacks present in areas where they'd never been detected before. We found seasonal patterns of occurrence, and we found some of the longest calls that had been recorded. So there was a lot of information that we could find, or just really faint calls that would have never been detected by a human. We could actually confirm that by kind of going back and doing this active learning process of, okay, this is what the model finds, and going and confirming that, and then improving the models with each iteration. So this is something that I did a few years ago. So Catherine Burchak's lab out of NOAA, Alaska, they had detected the first calls from the North Pacific right whales. So these are different than the North Atlantic right whales that get a lot of attention. These are fairly elusive populations. There's estimated to be only approximately 30 of them, and the calls were first published only a couple years ago. So I trained a model to detect these. It's not published, it's actually being incorporated into some of our other work to build a more comprehensive model across a range of species and across a range of contexts. But I just really love how the right whale call sound. It's a very unique, interesting sound that you wouldn't think is a real species. Those are called gunshot calls, and they sound very mechanical, but that's actually the noise that a North Pacific right whale might produce. There are other calls called up calls, can be confused with other species, including bowheads or humpbacks. But the gunshot calls are a very interesting and unique sound. So this is a photo that I took, and so it's also my Zoom background, as part of the Icelandic Orca project, where I volunteered on getting my hands dirty and actually being out in the field doing photo identification work. So it's not just on the back end, but a lot of the data collection and analyses really do happen kind of after all of the data are collected. So kind of putting the shout out for those of us who aren't always in the field, but doing the exploration work with the data after it comes in. So delighted to be here, and thank y'all for having me.
Lauren, thanks so much. And our final presenter for tonight, before we go to question and answers, is Jeffrey Donenfeld. He's the investment director at Boomtown Accelerators and a lifelong explorer. Previously, he worked with the United States Antarctic Program on a number of projects across Antarctica, including telescopes at the South Pole, expedition equipment at McMurdo, and the deep ice sheet coring drill in the remote western regions. Recently, and we're talking 2 weeks ago, Jeffrey returned safely from a boating expedition to the Galapagos, where he learned about the endemic flightless cormorants' fishing behaviors. He's our tech guru. He shepherded the chapter into the internet age with his invaluable technical assistance with our social media presence. I encourage all of you to look at the Rocky Mountain Facebook account. And here's Jeff. And
all right, thanks guys. Wanted to talk to you about a few things that I've been up to over the last couple of years. In 2015, I joined the United States Antarctic Program and the US Ice Drilling Program to work with the University of Wisconsin Space Science and Engineering Center and the Ice Drill Design and Operations team to do an expedition out to the West Antarctic Ice Sheet Field Camp, which is a little field camp out in Western Antarctica on a big ridge, a big hump in the ice that gives a very long core of ice down to the bedrock. And myself, along with a team from the University of Wisconsin, team of technicians and members of the military and scientists, traveled out to Waste Divide, set up camp, and worked on servicing and starting the disassembly and retro of the deep ice sheet coring drill. We traveled out there from New Zealand through McMurdo, out to Waste Divide on C-130s, long flights, very intense, sitting there strapped in the whole time, and had a small camp that we were living at. We had a number of semi-permanent tents for our utilities and main structures, and lived for the expedition mainly in small tents. This is a nice day at Waste Divide, and it's beautiful being out on the ice in the middle of nowhere. Not every day was quite like that. Some days it was a little bit intense in terms of the weather, but at least there was 24/7 unlimited solar power to power all of our instruments and gadgets. The ice coring drill was, before we took it apart, was housed in an arch, in a metal arch that was originally built on top of the ice, on the ground level. And over the 7 years that the drill was deployed, while it was drilling 3.5 miles down, It was covered under the ice, and so by the time we made it out there, we had to actually excavate out a whole bunch of snow and ice to reach the drilling arch. Did the project with a great group of folks from the University of Wisconsin, incorporating skills from driving tractors to dealing with the fine instruments and preservation of the borehole. For a little bit of background, this is inside the drilling arch. The deep ice sheet coring drill is a scientific coring drill that develops roughly 6-inch diameter ice core samples and has a hollow drill bit and can get these 3 or 4 foot long ice core samples out of the hole at different depths. Also notably with this drill, it's a replicant drill, so it's able to use the existing borehole to hit a certain depth and then steer itself under the ice to drill out a duplicate depth core sample from the same depth that it had previously gotten a core sample. Those core samples are packaged up in a packaging facility that we actually have refrigerated even colder than what it is naturally. That's in the back of this photo. And then shipped off back to us here in Denver at the National Ice Core Laboratory, where we, as the Rocky Mountain chapter of the Explorers Club, had the pleasure of visiting back in November 2019, I believe. We had a great time checking out the facility, and got to see the facility that these ice core samples are stored at until specific pieces of them are ordered by scientists and climate scientists and all sorts of people. So that was a little bit of work I did in Antarctica. Also, notably, to tie back to the Explorers Club, while waiting in McMurdo, I had the pleasure of visiting R.F. Scott's Discovery Hut. R.F. Scott was an honorary member of the Explorers Club from 1912 who set up this hut during his expedition in Antarctica, and had the pleasure of visiting it and looking inside the very well preserved hut. Finally, as was mentioned, I did just get back from a quick expedition to the Galapagos, where I had the privilege of swimming with a fishing flightless cormorant, which is endemic to the Galapagos, and it was certainly an interesting experience. So, thanks very much. I'll turn it back to Jeff.
As a chapter, we try to go on what we used to call in 6th grade field trips, and we had a fascinating time going to the ice core facility, where the warm room was about 10 degrees below zero and the cold room was about 30 below zero. And I got to use my Antarctic parka for the first time. Well, I've been honored to be a part of the Explorers Club for 32 years now, and I'm doubly honored to be its chapter chair. Watch explorers.org for more information about other chapter connects. And at this point, it gives me my honor to turn it over to Anne for some questions.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. It's always a pleasure to have you and your chapter talk to us this evening. You have one of the most impressive chapters, and you do so much with everyone. All of your trips, it's just incredible, and you put on so many different programs as well. So congratulations to you. One thing you didn't really talk about that much is the expedition and paper that you write or that you put out monthly, I believe. Do you want to tell some of our viewers about it?
Well, I just, for 26 years, I've written about exploration and adventure, mostly the quirky side of adventures. If it's an unusual story, I like to cover it. So these are not necessarily what you might see in National Geographic. I've written it for 26 years. It's about 10,000 readers across the internet, and I've been very proud. It's an independent publication, but of course I do cover up some of my favorite stories from the Explorers Club.
So if anybody's interested, please reach out to Jeff, and I'm sure he'd be willing and very happy to send it along to you.
Expeditionnews.com.
Really, it's incredibly informative and inspiring. So thank you so much for doing
Thanks for
that,
asking.
everyone.
Checks in the mail.
So I just wanted to ask Nancy, before we start off from the audience's questions, would you like to ask any questions yourself?
Actually, yeah, this was a fascinating tour around the world on presentations. So I wanted to ask Ulyana, what scientific goals are you bringing your efforts to summit the highest peaks in the United States?
Oh, great question. So most of my work actually has been internationally based. And so with the pandemic going on, kind of been pivoting to more, yes, domestic peaks. And the one I have my eye on is Denali. So that's Alaska's highest because of the state of the glaciers there. So the Muldrow on the north side has just started surging, which is an event that happens in that case every 50 years. So glaciers are changing so quickly due to climate change. So we definitely want to be looking at impacts in Alaska in the future. And then also expanding out to educational programs for children and teenagers and kind of any adults who are interested in science. So there's the research component when it comes to like collecting the samples and understanding glacial changes in the US. And then there's also that whole educational component that I hope to start building out once we can get out there again.
That's fantastic. And then 49 others to do. So you've got your work cut out for you, don't you?
So my husband actually finished all 50 state high points. We actually got one of the harder ones this past summer, and I'm on number 30. So I'm getting there.
I hear Rhode Island is a hard one because you can't get permission.
Actually, I did that one back in grad school out east, so all set.
Outstanding. And I did have a question for George. George, is there any plan to revive the Himalayan stove project?
That's a good question. It's asked frequently. We had a good run at it. The supply chain issue is a significant one because the stoves are manufactured in China and India. And I spent, as a matter of fact, the last trip I took before lockdown, I was up in Colorado talking with the people that supply the stoves, and it is very unlikely that they'll be able to resume production. So, and right now, I mean, we still have 50 stoves in Kathmandu that we can't distribute because of the COVID situation over there. It's just, the logistics would be very, very difficult and probably impossible.
You know, you have set up.
We had to raise a lot of money for it. And it's in this climate, this economic climate, the stoves, they're not expensive. They cost $150 a piece delivered. You know, so that's a nice dinner for two and a good bottle of wine. But in this climate, I'm afraid that going out and continuing to raise that kind of money would be a very challenging operation.
This is an example where you say, let's declare a victory and move on.
That's great. And, you know, I have to say, first of all, thank you for the impact that you have made and are continuing to make as you move forward and evolve. But you've also created such a really interesting model that others could follow in solving all sorts of different problems. And since so many of you are in education and informal education, I know you're going to reach out and make impacts with everybody. So, Anne, let me
add one more comment to that the members of the club, as it was coincidental that I started the project just when I was inducted, and with Jeff's help and with Chris Bonnington's help and with David Concannon's help and with Ken Kamler's help, everybody rallied around. And I really would not have been able to do it without the support that we got from club members all up and down the line. And I think that's a very valuable thing in all of our collective association with the Explorers Club.
I have to agree with you. We're all incredibly fortunate to have this kind of association with all the members around the world. It's an incredible perk to all of us. And, you know, what you're continuing on with Champions of the Planet is incredible. And you once told me a story. You had mentioned that you're 84 now. And we were talking about Walter Monk. And
yes.
You want to just recount that story for
go
a
ahead.
minute?
There are several Walter Monk stories. I met him at your house.
Well, I think it was really about his age and how, you know, you just thought that it was an incredible, you know, that he was incredible being at the age that he was and doing what he was doing. and you kept thinking that every year that you grow up, that you keep going, is another year that you can catch up to what Walter Monk was doing. So
yeah, he was incredible, and he left us, as you know, 2.5 years ago at 101, and was active to the very end, as definitely a role model for all of us.
And I'm just going to continue on for George for 1 second, that I think all of you will be interested in. We were discussing the other day what's going on right now at base camp. And I was wondering if you could share that information with everyone.
Well, it's a blooming catastrophe. A lot of us were very, very nervous about Nepal even opening up the season at Everest. But that's beyond our control, and Alan Arnett and others we were all collectively concerned, and our worst fears are being recognized. There is an epidemic of COVID at base camp among the climbers and among the Sherpas. It's very hard to get news because the government has shut it down completely. So all of our information is on texts and Zoom calls that Alan mostly can make to individual camps. And there's no accurate count. And what makes it particularly serious is that the COVID has impacts on the lungs and breathing. And without COVID, it's damn hard to get to the summit of Everest, even with bottled oxygen. And we're all concerned that it's going to become a significant catastrophe. And Nepal is out of hospital beds in Kathmandu, and they're almost out of oxygen, like in India. And it's going to be grim.
So I just thought that was just something that everyone, all of us should know what's going on over there and be aware. And if there's any way that we can help to do so.
Well, if we can airlift oxygen into the hospitals in Kathmandu, that would be significant.
Any supplies that we can send over, everybody should do their part in it. So we have a question from Luna. Thanks to all the speakers. I have a question for Lauren. Is Google building a sound bank for all the species?
No, not exactly. That might not be the most feasible thing for us to do. But we do have partnerships with NOAA and NCEI where they are publishing a lot of the data on the cloud, and it is accessible. So the paper we just published, actually, the link through the paper does have the annotations for the humpbacks and the data available online. So for some species where we have the permissions from our partners, we are publishing some of them.
One more question for you. And this is the Humpback Whale Project. What is the confidence level statistically that the sound signals you were tracking was indeed from humpback whales instead of other marine animals who could make similar sounds?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our humpback detector is binary classification. That just means that we're looking at, is this humpback versus not? Most of the noises that we saw, so I identified quite a few minkies. The minky boing sometimes got detected in our early phase of the models. So this is where we had this active learning process where we listened to the high scoring samples and then re-annotated the data based off of how the classifier had detected. So when the humpback classifier is detecting minkies, we updated the labels for the minkies to be negative for humpbacks and then retrained the model. So most of our precision recall metrics were actually pretty good, usually over 0.9 precision and 0.9 recall but we looked at this individually by the different sites that we had. So it does vary a little bit with different noise conditions, but we didn't have too much of a confounding effect of other species. But our newer model that we're developing is trying to get at that a little bit more so we can understand both confounding effects and co-occurrence.
Thank you. Now, this question is from Henry for Markus. Do you have anything to mention about the Granite City?
What's that? The Granite City? Where is it? Where is the Granite City?
That's his question. He was wondering whether you have anything to mention about it. He clarified that the Granite City is really in Scotland, in Aberdeenshire.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. All right. One more question. Is human environmentalism ultimately biased towards our own species? Would our Earth bounce back and thrive if we were to disappear tomorrow? I think you can all take a crack at that, whoever wants to go.
I'm just wondering the context of my talk of the question. I'll let somebody else give a crack at it.
How about you, Brian? What do you think?
Oh, goodness. Boy, if we all disappeared tomorrow, certainly a lot of things would improve for a lot of species, but they wouldn't really improve for us. So I'm not entirely sure if that's a realistic premise necessarily to begin with.
over this period of COVID, how things have bounced.
It's really impressive. Yeah, we've seen sea life returning to Venice. We've seen a dramatic increase in air quality. We've seen recovery in black carbon. We've seen reduced levels in some glaciers where I work in Alaska. So certainly, if we tampen down our economic activity, or what ultimately becomes our economic activity, things do improve for sure. The premise of us just disappearing is kind of a hard one to imagine, and we are yet still one species on the planet. So it's probably more a function of trying to leverage what we've learned, and how I think it's inspiring and should be a reason for optimism with exactly how fast many things bounce back during this shutdown. We have the power to shut things down, and we can make improvements. And so I think, if anything, we've learned from the pandemic in terms of this environmental thing on this train of thought is exactly how resilient the system is. And there are a lot of problems, but I think a lot of surprises, at least in that line, were good ones.
For Jeffrey Donnenfeld, while you were down in Antarctica, Bill Stone, another member from the club, were you working with him at all? Doing that? No.
Nope,
So,
I wasn't working with Bill.
So it's amazing how many interactions there are between our members in all areas around the world. So I figured I'd just throw that out there. To see
I appreciate the question. It is amazing, and it's amazing being a part of the Explorers Club community, as well as the Antarctic workers, field scientists community, and understanding all the energy in there. It's great connecting with people.
It is, and that's what makes Chapter Connect so special.
Absolutely.
Because even there are quite a few people watching right now, but people will watch it within the next week or 2 weeks. And if anybody's going over to Colorado or any of the Rocky Mountain areas, they will certainly get in touch with you, and hopefully you'll be able to connect with them. Joe Watson asking for George. I think we've already answered this question, but will you start up the stove project again when the supply chain problems are solved?
I don't think so. First of all, I don't think the supply chain problem will be solved, and I'm at a point in my life cycle where the amount of energy and effort that would have to go into starting it up again would be substantial, and I'm going to devote my attention to changing the planet. But let me reflect on the question that was asked about the human race. When I was born in 1937, the population of the planet was a little over 3 billion. It is now 7.8 billion, and by the end of this next decade, or by 2050, it's projected that at current levels, even though it's slowed down a little bit, that it'll be 10 billion. So it will have tripled in a little over 100 years. The open space, the wilderness, the areas that we all love, has decreased in Attenborough's in my lifetime from 66% to 35%. So our presence on the planet is putting it under an awful lot of stress, including all the greenhouse gases that are going up. So it's going to be a hard push to slow it down, let alone reverse it.
I agree, and if I can jump in there for 1 second, I agree that we're going to need to massively, moderate our impact on the environment, and learn to live in harmony with all the other species and the environment and everything. That said, I do think that the human race is in a good position to use our intelligence and ability to develop new technologies to potentially, in the future, be able to moderate a possibly cataclysmic world-ending event that other species on this planet wouldn't have the ability to do. I think that could be one good use for the intelligence of our species.
I agree with you completely, and it's going to take coordinated effort.
Absolutely.
At this tech level and at the low level that we're approaching with the Champions of the Planet, where it's incremental things. You know, we're suggesting to people, you know, don't become a vegetarian, even though beef has an impact on this thing and the food that's raised for raising the cattle, but declare a meatless Monday. Take incremental steps, little steps in consciousness with reaching the kind of goal that you and I are both talking about.
Terrific suggestion. Thank you so much for adding that and including it. Great, Jeffrey. Thank you for bringing that up. Before we get off, because I think that I think we've taken care of most of the questions from the audience tonight. But Brian, you were saying that people will have the opportunity if they want to do some citizen science work with you.
Yeah, certainly. The link should be posted on the Facebook channel. So it's a pretty simple thing. In fact, I could show you real fast. Give me 2 seconds.
Sure.
Yeah. So the project, you know, this Edges of All Life project, the link, it's a longer little story, but if you zoom into wherever you live, there is a species whose current known range limit is near you. So all the orange dots are northernmost and all the blue dots are southernmost. So there's probably a lot of folks in New York. There's actually a lot of species that currently our northernmost record is there. And if you want to teach some kids about you know, species in that neighborhood, or you want to learn about species in the neighborhood, or you just want to see, like, is this thing growing further north than it used to? This project uses the iNaturalist app, which is a very easy to set up app. You just put it on your phone and it kind of does the rest for you. You go and find your plant, take a picture of it. It'll help you identify the plant. And it'll get uploaded. A couple people will have to verify that it's research grade. But once it's there, it'll pop up on here. So for example, if you're in Manhattan, you know, and you want to go look for whatever this is, I don't know the common name for that one, but this purple flower, that's the northernmost one we know about. And this isn't to say there isn't northern, you know, more northern examples, of course. But the goal of this is to find out where those northernmost and southernmost edges are, because that's where we're going to see response in terms of climate change. And it's also, from an educational point of view, just an easily communicable thing, you know, the north and south. Now, scientifically, you know, you want to look for the warmest and coldest maybe, but north and south works out pretty well. And these are all over the place. And so if you want to go explore, you can go explore. Let's, you know, go up to Middletown and look for this cool looking, well, it's a tree, I guess. There's 19,000 species on here. So there's 2 records there. Oh, it's southernmost as well. There's 19,000 species on here, and it gets updated fairly regularly.
So it's great because it's something that every one of us can do.
Everyone can do. You can do it wherever you live in North America.
Go looking for these different species and send in the information, and you're helping the planet.
And you're helping science.
Brian, is this a completely independent database, or does this connect with something like iNaturalist?
This is the iNaturalist research grade database. Gotcha. So the iNaturalist database is longer. There's a whole ton of species records which have not been verified to be accurate. This is not those. These are ones that have been verified to be accurate. So here's an example of a whole range. This is lodgepole pine. The northernmost lodgepole pine known is up here. It's this one. And the southernmost, well, there's a group of 5 actually, it looks like. And the southernmost is in Baja. But this one that you're looking at here, those are all different species. That's how many different records there are. So there's no shortage of them. And it's really pretty darn fun.
So what a great idea for Mother's Day. Take your mothers and go out looking.
Set a new record. Yeah. Push the field.
We have one more question for Ulyana, and then also I just wanted to ask Ulyana about her citizen science project too and what people can do. But this is again from Luna. and it's asking you, based on your experience with the simulated mission to an asteroid, do you think civilians are suitable for space travels?
That's an excellent question. And actually, to be selected for Hera, we had to go through similar testing that astronauts go through. So it's there's the physical tests, medical, and psychological. That's a big one. And so I would say that in my team, like we didn't really have any issues. Everyone had a basic kind of tech level of understanding for what we were doing. So I think for any civilians going, it would be important to demonstrate some of those capabilities because you don't want someone panicking in the case of something going wrong up in space. I think everyone should have access eventually to space. I think seeing the planet from above is going to really change perspectives on the planet and what we can do to help it. But it needs to be done in a safe manner. And I think some base level of training and psychological testing would be really critical to make sure that things don't go wrong and then it shuts down an entire civilian type program.
And as far as citizen science projects that you're working on right now,
Yeah. So I'm in the midst of, because of the pandemic, had a lot of time to actually process data. So working on building a data repository, which I hope to make available public, so that any scientists, people interested in science who want access to data can have it, including imagery or black carbon data from places we've collected. So it goes beyond just me and my capabilities and my expertise, that other people can be using it for publications or for public knowledge. That's where we're at right now.
Sounds terrific. So I just wanted to let everybody know that next Monday night, we have Bill Steele, not Bill Stone, Bill Steele coming on to talk about Sistema Huautla in Mexico, 50 years exploring the deepest cave in the Americas. So I hope everybody tunes in on May 10th for that. Also, our Florida chapter, we have two wonderful members, Julie Wallace and Diane Boswell, are starting a film festival called Explore Florida Film Festival. It's going to be taking place on May 8th at the Enzian Theater. And for those who are members of the Florida chapter, please check it out. Ask Julie Wallace exactly where to go and what time it is, and they'll be happy to send you the information. Let's see. Also, hey, Nancy, is something going on with your chapter tonight?
Tonight, yeah, actually, we have a social, like a real face-to-face social at several cities around town. So I'm missing it right now, and I'm anxious to get to the pub and see everybody. Hey, I know, what a sacrifice, right? But you guys were well worth my missing out on at least one beer. What a fascinating program you've put together tonight. Jeff Blumenfeld, I know how hard it is to do a chapter connect and round up, herd cats, because all of these people are not sitting around waiting for the phone to ring. They're obviously really busy. So thank you for all the organization of that. And to all the presenters, I know there was a great deal of time that went into putting a presentation together. What I think some of our audience doesn't understand is how much practice time goes into it. And again, herding the cats to come together to be able to practice this. Technology, way to go, Jeffrey Donenfeld. You really have brought your chapter into the 21st century. No glitches.
Right.
I mean, it worked great. And part of that is thanks to Kevin Murphy, who is the guy behind the scenes at headquarters running things. I think he's still hiding out in somebody's guest bedroom along the way, but he's rocking this. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from you guys in the future. And just seeing the successes. I know all of you are not sitting around waiting for phones to ring. You're really moving forward. And so anxious to see where you're taking this as this world opens up again. And I want to echo what George and Jeff were talking about, that we all need to take small steps, but let's take care of this amazing planet. I haven't seen enough of it yet, so I'm certainly not ready to disappear. And Next Thursday, we've got another Chapter Connect coming to you. And this time we're going to showcase some of our members that are in the New York State area. So anxious to hear from many of them.
It sounds great. So, again, I just want to echo what Nancy said. Terrific chapter, terrific presentations tonight. And thank you so much, all of you, for being willing to present. And we totally enjoyed meeting all of you, and keep in touch with us. so that we can follow through and see what you're doing in weeks and months and years to come. So thank you, everyone. Nancy, it's wonderful. Go out, get your beer. Have a great time, everyone, tonight. And we look forward to seeing you on Monday.
Yep.
Have a
Thank
great
you all.
weekend.
Bye.
Thank you.
Happy Mother's Day, everyone.